Good morning, you guys. We are going to be reading Chapter 10 of The Barren Grounds by David A. Robertson. Okay, Chapter 10. The end of Chapter 9, we had Morgan step through the portal to go after Eli because she's quite certain that he's gone through the portal. He had put the picture back up in the attic, and he wasn't in his bedroom. He's nowhere in the house. She's certain he stepped through the portal. She doesn't really want to go through there, but she also wants to do what's right and be there for Eli. So she's going to go through, I think. Okay, Chapter 10. There was no time to waste. Every second Morgan waited was another moment Eli was on the other world, alone. Maybe dying, and all because she'd said such a horrible thing to him. The only thing she needed to do before leaving was to think of a way to keep the portal open so that when she found him, they could come back. At the same time, she needed to stop the cold from coming in. Shutting the door wouldn't help. The blizzard would find a way to keep pushing cold air all through the house. It would have to be done on the other side. How would I close the portal on this side if I wasn't just going to tear the paper off? She asked herself. She looked away from the secret room and took inventory of the unfinished attic, desperate for an idea. The skeletal walls, the nails, the screws and wires all over the floor, the piles of debris with drywall and plywood, and that's it. Morgan gathered up 3 pieces of plywood that she thought, collectively, would cover the portal, grabbed a handful of nails, and took a hammer from the tool bag. With everything she needed, she stepped inside the secret room and closed the door firmly behind her. She pocketed the nails, then tossed the hammer and scraps of wood through the opening. "I guess I'm next," she said. She would have taken a deep breath, but the air was too cold and the wind too harsh. She could hardly catch her breath, never mind take a nice, long, calming one. She clutched the sides of the portal, braced her feet against the wall, and climbed up, then through the opening. Once on the other side, she fell a few feet down, landing in soft, untouched snow. It was like falling into feathers. Morgan stood up and saw that she had come out of a hollow near the base of a massive tree, part of a thickly wooded forest. And while the tree she'd come out of was thickest and tallest, the others in the forests were no saplings. They looked as old as the earth, and it was incredibly beautiful and familiar. Morgan felt an unmistakable tug in her chest, like this was the reason she'd actually come here. She knew better, though, and shook off whatever pull she felt. She was here for Eli, and by now he could be lying in the field somewhere, alone and freezing cold. She fished through the deep snow, found the wood and the hammer, and proceeded to nail the flat pieces of wood into the tree and over the portal. This took a long time, long enough that the cold pierced through her hoodie and her hands became frozen stiff. She had to blow on them or stick them in the kangaroo pocket between each hammer strike. But eventually, the portal was almost fully covered. Now, at least, the attic would be shielded from the blizzard. Katie and James wouldn't notice the cold. But in the morning, if Morgan wasn't back with Eli, they would most certainly notice both their foster kids missing. Something, she told Katie, echoed in her mind. "I won't run away." She needed to find Eli and figured that she had 3 hours at most until Katie and James woke up. Morgan willed herself to turn away from the forest, the huge tree, and towards the open field. The wind was ferocious, equally cold and strong and loud, and the snow was deep and treacherous. Standing where she was, it already reached her knees. Regardless, she took a step forward, then another, closer to the village and, hopefully, Eli. Each step felt harder than the last. The wind was like fire against her exposed face and instantly froze the tears that fell from her eyes. Her muscles and joints ached from the effort of moving through the ever-deepening snow. which crawled inside her moccasins and gnawed at her limbs. Winnipeg, the city she lived in no matter what home she was at, wasn't called Winterpeg for nothing. The winters there were unforgiving, but this winter was 10 times worse. The only thing Morgan could see was white. A sheet of unblemished and endless snow lay in front of her. Snow lifted off the surface and danced wildly in the air like ghosts. There was no sign yet of the forest Eli had drawn on the horizon. No sign anywhere of the village. No footprints that might lead her to him. Just white. Terrible white. It could have been that she was walking for minutes or hours, but she carried on, kept peering through the storm to see something, anything. She carried on until her legs refused to go one more step, and the white slate in front of her began to turn black. "Eli!" she cried desperately. "Eli!" She wanted to save him, but needed saving herself. The black came in tiny spots. Those spots grew in Morgan's vision. "Don't just die, Morgan. Do something," she thought. She needed to shield herself from the wind and somehow the cold. The storm crushed her from all sides. There was only one place to go. Down. She shoveled snow until her arms and hands and fingers wouldn't move any longer. She lay down in the hole she had made. There she curled into a ball, shut her eyes, and blacked out, murmuring, "I'm sorry, Eli. I'm so sorry." So it's cold. All she can see is white. She's lost. She has no idea where she's going. And now she's so cold she can't go any further. So she's dug a hole in the snow to try to protect herself. And she's curled herself down up in the bottom of that hole. Now, if you know anything about survival in extreme winter temperatures, cold temperatures, when you're on the verge of hypothermia, which is what it sounds like it might be, because she's starting to see black spots, she can't feel certain things anymore. She's lost all her bearings, even though she didn't really have them in the first place. The last thing you actually want to do is go to sleep, because if you go to sleep when you're suffering, your body is starting to suffer from hypothermia, your body will just get colder and you won't wake up. Okay? Oh, here we have a Cree word. I'm going to go to the front to make sure I'm going to pronounce it properly. Esquasis, girl. It means girl. Esquasis. Esquasis. It sounded like a voice, but Morgan couldn't be sure. She couldn't be sure that she was even still alive. It was a distant whisper, fighting through the screaming wind. She kept her eyes shut, tried to collapse even further into herself. Her body was shaking, burning. Tansy, young one. This time, it was unmistakable. Morgan forced her head to turn and worked even harder to open her eyes. They'd been frozen shut, tears to ice. She superglued her fingertips together once and needed to pry them apart, and opening her eyes now felt very much like that. But gradually, the black gave way to white, and in the middle of that white stood a silhouette. Okay, silhouette means like the outline of a shape, of a person, of a body. Morgan blinked and tried to focus. The figure leaned towards her, extended its arms, and when it did, flashes of a nightmare came into her mind. It was the Fisher. He had black eyes, brown fur, rounded ears, a snout with a black nose, and white whiskers. He wore clothing, too. A long-sleeved hooded jacket made of light brown leather, beige pants, mucklucks. Esquasis, Ostum, come with me. When he opened his mouth, she saw something else about him. 4 long, sharp teeth. No, she forced out through trembling teeth and lips. Ostum, the Fisher demanded. So let's go check what Ostum means. Ostum, come. Okay, so the Fisher's saying, come, you need to come with me. What choice was there? Morgan took the animal being's paw, and he lifted her to her feet. Wrapping her arms around his shoulders, he put his own arm around her waist and urged her onwards. But they'd only gone a few yards when she collapsed, sank into the snow, almost as deep as when she dug a hole herself. Morgan woke up staring at White again, and before long, she realized that she was being carried over the fisher's shoulders. She didn't protest. She stayed slack, as though still passed out, and just watched his legs dig into the snow, then lift out. "How did you come here, Esqueces?" he asked. Morgan tried to repeat the word, but couldn't. Her jaw were frozen. "Esqueces," he repeated. "Girl, how did you come here?" Morgan rubbed her jaws to give them some warmth and tried to speak again. "Through, drawing." She was too exhausted to consider how ridiculous it must have sounded. "A drawing?" the fisher said knowingly, as if it didn't sound ridiculous to him at all. "You came here through the great tree." "That big tree?" "Yes." "And why are you here?" "Eli," was all she could say. Her jaw and mouth refused to comply any longer. Eli's name came out like a breath. She wondered if the fisher had even heard her, but after a long time he said, "The other one." Morgan felt a burst of energy. She lifted her head, craned her neck, and stared right at the animal being. "You've seen him?" "Hey," he said, "I've seen him." "Where? Where is he?" "Here." They were entering a small village that consisted of long houses constructed out of poles and bark cut into rectangular slabs, with rounded roofs of the same material. Each one looked about the size to fit one family, and they were built among pockets of particularly thick trees to provide shelter from the elements. There were 7 in total, and the 7 houses encircled a large thatched hut that stood in a perfectly round clearing. The hut was sheltered from the weather by the lodges and trees, and footprints led from the hut to each of the dwellings. There were fire pits outside the houses, and racks that hung over the fires, used to smoke meat. But there weren't many pieces of meat hanging there. Scraps, if anything. "Where is here?" Morgan asked. The fisher lifted her off his shoulders with great care as they neared the entrance to one of the longhouses. She wobbled slightly. He steadied her. "This is the only surviving village in the North Country," he said somberly. "Welcome to Mizuwa." And so now we're in the village of Mizuwa. So here we are, Book 1, the Mizuwa Saga. And now we are in the village with the fisher, and it sounds like Eli is there. And it also sounds like the fisher knew that this was going to happen, or knew that it was possible. He's like, "Oh, you came through the tree." So maybe Morgan and Eli aren't the only kids that have arrived there. I don't know. All right, guys, that's it for chapter 10. Next video will be chapter 11. Okay, take care, guys.